And greetings. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm Salvador Cordova. It's a pleasure to be with you all this evening. We're living through some tough times right now around the world. It's a time for prayer and reflection. I reach out especially to Christian graduate students who are Christians and creationists, especially in the sciences. Several of my audience are in graduate school in biology, chemistry, other disciplines at the master's and PhD level. Also, some of them are even professional researchers. For those of you who don't know who I am, and greetings to all those who came from DapperDino's channel, I consider him a good friend. We sharply disagree on many things, but I'm grateful for him. I'm grateful for what he did to stand up for Cindy Lincoln. And Cindy said she's coming, so if she's not able to make it, I'm going to check my texts here. So let me look right now, see if she's all right. So, you know, Dapper stood up for what was right. That pricked my conscience, and I said, you know, I'm going to take a hit for siding with Cindy, and some, not a lot, but a few creationists are not happy with me that I sided with Cindy. Also, I am deeply concerned that people are sending their families to Dinosaur Adventureland, and there's safety issues. I said, you know, enough's enough. I need to come out and say there are better creationists, like say Joe DeWeese or John Gideon Hartnett, John Sanford, Rob Stadler, Change Tan, people who are proven scientists. You may not agree, you know, the evolutionists may not agree with them, but they certainly earned their stripes in the secular world. Go to those. Learn your science, learn your creationism from these individuals. You'll be better off. So for those who don't, who are coming from Dapper's channel, Dapper's channel, I misspoke there, Dapper's channel, and who don't know me, I'm a molecular biophysics researcher. I have 5 science degrees, including a Master of Science in Applied Physics from Johns Hopkins University. I published in secular venues, secular peer-reviewed venues. Even one of my publications was critical of evolutionary theory. That was a miracle that I got that one through. And I worked for 7 years under world famous geneticist John Sanford. He was a very successful secular scientist. He invented the gene gun. That invention is in the collection of the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. And he's a retired Cornell research professor. I had the privilege of working for him while I took care of my elderly and disabled mother for the last 18 years. I was employed with him for 7, and so I'm deeply indebted to him. So you know that I'm really tight with the creationist community. That being said, I feel it's very important to have contact and to hear the opposing arguments and viewpoints expressed. Dr. Sanford, out of his own pocket, paid for my schooling at the FAS graduate school at the National Institutes of Health, which is probably one of the premier biological research organizations. They have staff of 30,000, and he didn't send me off to Dinosaur Adventureland to learn about God's creation. He sent me to study under evolutionary biologists and other kinds of evolutionists. So I had to learn to be comfortable in an environment where I'm constantly challenged with opposing viewpoints. That being said, after I went through that experience, I'm more convinced of the intelligent design argument. I will, however, say, and for reasons that both Erica Gutzik-Gibbon and DapperDino continue to articulate quite well. There are difficulties with the young Earth creation, young cosmos creation model. As far as my background, I was a theistic evolutionist. I was raised in a Roman Catholic home. I now profess the evangelical and mostly Reformed interpretation of the scriptures. When I got saved at age 15, which was a long time ago, when I got saved at age 15, I was a theistic evolutionist for about a year afterward, and I encountered an Institute of Creation Research tract that really was criticizing abiogenesis, but I didn't know any of the distinctions between abiogenesis and evolution theory, but it was sufficient for me to reject both abiogenesis and evolution theory. I was then an old Earth creationist for a number of years, and then after that, I became a young Earth creationist. This transformation took place over about a 40-year time span. So that gives you an idea of how old I am. I'm pretty old. And so this is something that I've had to deal with and face the secular world that has a different viewpoint. So people are wondering how this might have happened. I actually, the more that I studied, especially after when I studied applied physics, which included actually a lot of theoretical and physics and also cosmology, astrophysics, general relativity, quantum mechanics, I became even more convinced that the young cosmos model is viable. And I shared last night that this book, Solar System Evolution, which I read after I completed an undergraduate degree in mathematics with a minor in physics. As I read this book, I said, the solar system looks so well designed, it doesn't look like a product of accidental processes. And I said, okay, maybe the universe is old, but it certainly looks like the solar system is created. It seems to have it has parallel challenges to the origin of life problem. The mechanics of it, the mechanics of how this is assembled, it's not consistent with my understanding of physics, and it wasn't consistent with even mainstream physics, because when I read through this, they highlight all the problems, and I said, it's easier for me to believe in miracles at this point, because the way they would describe it. I'm going to do a show at some point on angular momentum. And so this raised kind of the issue of things like distant starlight and radiometric dating. When I studied cosmology, I almost fell out of my chair when they're describing the inflation model. The inflation model, the other thing is I've had professors that were questioning the Big Bang, starting at George Mason, and then aspects of it even at Johns Hopkins. There were whispers. And there were, bumped around was the idea of variable speed of light. And that definitely caught my attention. So when I studied cosmology, they postulated that there's this inflation event or field or whatever you call it, where galactic amounts of matter have space inserted at thousands, millions, maybe who knows how big, times the speed of light. And I said, if they're going to invoke mechanisms like that, then young cosmos creationism is no more outrageous than some of the theories in mainstream cosmology. And in fact, that criticism continues to grow. And as I've seen it over the years, there's been more and more dissent from the Big Bang, and particularly the inflation model. They've been invoking now variable speed of light as a resolution to that problem. And I'm just like, well, yeah, this is starting to play into the hands of the young Earth creationists. So you could see that over a 40-year time, I began to be more encouraged. That being said, I did not like Ken Ham either. I felt demonizing sensitive people in church was totally inappropriate. To be equating me just because I believe the earth is old at the time with all the moral ills of humanity I did not think that was fair to me, but I especially didn't think it was fair to other Christians who were admirable. And I've criticized Ken Ham's handling of finances. He's had a reputation of stabbing other young Earth creationists in the back. The Lippard blog covered this in the early 2000s, and I said I would never want to do business with someone like that. He's basically running an amusement park, and he's demonizing people that are having doubts and wrestling with difficulty. So he's not on my Christmas card list. I'd come to this rather independently, and I found a better home actually in the intelligent design community, which is mostly young Earth creationists, young cosmos creationists. So I don't know why Cindy may be having a little difficulty joining the show. So I may have sent her a. Is there a big echo? By the way, are you hearing a big echo? I'm going to try to cut down. I don't know what's causing that. So my apologies for that. So let me see if I cut this down. I don't know if that's going to cut the echo down. Let me just check. Does that cut the echo down? I hope that cut it down. So please, okay, great. So that's a little bit, well, actually a lot about my background. So this show is going to talk, I'm going to start off talking about the Kent with Bent show. This is the first time I actually watched from start to finish. First time I watched from start to finish. And I did take notes, and I have to admit, it was painful. It was painful, okay? Nothing personal against you guys. I thought that the dissertation evaluation was actually much more valuable to me personally and also professionally. I keep trying to say that to creationists, you know, it's good to hear the critics when they criticize other people and yourself, because occasionally they will point out something that's weak in the way you're either making a presentation or you've actually made a factual mistake. And it's sometimes painful to go through that. The other thing is sometimes our choice of words or even the arguments, even if they are correct, they can be docked, you know, we can deduct points, so to speak, because our choice of words and the way we present are not as good as we could do. So that's why I do this. Now, I know that you guys from Dapper's channel that we're doing this, there is some enjoyment in mocking your foes. I totally get that, you know, to see them when they mess up, and we'll laugh at them. All right, I totally get that. So I'd say overall, for the most part, I agreed almost with everything that they called out. I said, you know, even when Kent might be right on something, I felt his presentation was weak. That being said, I could see his appeal. There's a saying that maybe 80%, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. 80% is nonverbal communication. He has very strong body language. He can put people at ease. He has that folksy sound, even when he's saying things that are rather disturbing. So Cheshire Vic was pointing out that when he did something rather, I think, abusive to his own children, he was just saying in such a calm manner. I actually didn't notice until she pointed it out. She was saying, did you notice he was just smiling through that? And I'm just like, that's actually all I noticed. I thought he was just telling a happy story until I actually thought about what he said. And this was the incident where I think he gave one can of Coke to his kids and they're fighting over it. He took it and threw it out the window. Now, the funny thing that really irked me about that is that's littering. I unfortunately live near a highway, and I have to clear out cans from my backyard because the wind just blows it in. And that wasn't the case when I moved here a long time ago, but now it's just with all the traffic. I just don't like I don't like picking up other people's garbage. It really gets under me. So I felt that's what irritated me. But I didn't process it until people were commenting. I said, you know what, the the um, the anecdote he's relating actually doesn't speak well of him, but he actually did such a good job at delivery. It didn't register until people stopped and paused. So I have about 15 items where they were doing their drinking game, and I was scoring. So when they said AIG are what, I'm not going to use that word, and sorry. There are some things about tea that were mentioned there, and I'm not going to go there. I couldn't help but laugh. Yes, my mind's in the gutter, I admit it. I do have my problems with AIG. I don't like the demonization of other Christians. There's no need to do that. And I will say one thing that I heard on the channel that I think is very accurate. The use of socialization to instill people's faith. I think that's very powerful. They tried to use that on me, and I didn't like it. I didn't like being demonized and shunned and treated like I had, I had the plague or some disease when when I would raise difficult questions about the Christian faith. And before I move on, I just wanted to say just the purpose of this channel, and this is something personal to share. The world's a scary place, and I am concerned about how long the human race can continue now that we have nuclear weapons. This whole thing with Vladimir Putin and Ukraine, it could spiral out of, we don't know how rational an actor can be. And someone who has nuclear weapons under his belt, he could start a war and that no one really wants. And even without nuclear weapons, a cyber attack where they cut the transatlantic cable, it would have, now that our economies are so integrated, this could really, it could crash the banks. And civilization as we know it is at risk. And last night I was just agonizing over this. I said, Lord, what's the point of continuing? And the other thing is for me to think that there's a God who hears us and hears our prayers. That's important to me. And that's why I've studied this topic. So not a sermon, just a thought. So yes, I agree with the negative opinion of AIG. One thing I will say that will help, and I wish Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson and I had been persecuted together. We were at Lipscomb University before the biology faculty making presentations. They screamed at me. They screamed even more at Nathaniel Jeanson. I wasn't even presenting on anything that was young earth creationist. I was just talking about chromatin modifications and the ENCODE project. And just because I'm associated with Dr. John Sanford, the faculty were practically screaming. They were really rude. So I've suffered with Nathaniel Jeanson. But one point that I think will help creationists, and Nathaniel, even though I doubt you're listening, I'll point this out. It helps when you spend time with your critics. It really does. Because if they have a beef with you, you could say, okay, hey, Dr. Dan, your criticism was right. I need to retract that. Or I could have phrased that differently. Instead, what will happen is you'll start to get a lot of accusations that you're lying, you're trying to bamboozle things. You could say you disagree with the criticism, but at least you're trying to engage, and they can ask you hard questions. That's why when I saw Michael Behe there with Dr. Dan, I said, good on Michael Behe, and I believe he may have even had 2 shows. I think that dialogue is important. Now, there are people, and I didn't have my finest moment yesterday, I can get in an argument with, and I really lose it. I mentioned that some of the origin of life researchers are appealing to multiverses. And Mark Drysdale said, no, that's not true. I gave him a citation. I said, there's at least one evolutionary biologist who says that, another scientist that does. I put it in the side chat. I mentioned I put it in the side chat. 2 or 3 times I mentioned it to him, and he kept being in denial. I lost it. I screamed at him. I said, dude, I just provided you the data. You're denying it. There's no basis for a discussion at this point, because we're just talking about what other people said and on the record. And people like that are not welcome on my channel. I have banned people like that. I banned creationists from this channel. Just so you know, I banned SFT and RawMat. I feel their conduct has been reprehensible toward me, and they're not welcome on this channel. I don't believe creationists should be following them. They are not a good example. I've listed the names who I think are a good example. I put like John Gideon Hartnett, who's a physics professor. You could look, his Wikipedia entry will make your jaw drop. Rob Stadler, John Sanford, etc. So let me continue here. Oh, I couldn't help but notice that. Oh, that's so kind. Yes, in my casino days, I would definitely treat you, because they gave me free meals at lavish restaurants. I got kicked out of the casinos. So anyway, so I have the timestamps here. There was a discussion about the Shroud of Turin in the napkin thing that Kent Hovind. I have to say, I have to agree. Don't throw extraneous things out there. So even though I'm favorable to the Shroud of Turin, talking about the napkin and how the napkin indicated Jesus is coming back, I'm like, okay, Kent, there are better scriptures for that. The one about Jude and Enoch, that was me being a young earth creationist. I thought that was actually kind of clever, that at least closed some gaps. All right. And I'm ambivalent to that. I really think the issue will be data. And on the show yesterday, I said, why do people debate? No, it was my show, I think, on Saturday night. I was talking about World War II fighter tactics and why people disagree and debate. I said, it's partly because there's uncertainty about what is true. In mathematics, we don't have those sort of arguments. I really don't see a lot of debates among the professionals in mathematics. During the history of mathematics, there were debates like about whether there's such a thing as irrational numbers, and about integers and stuff like that. There were some interesting debates, and then also non-Euclidean geometries. But for the basic stuff, you don't have these fierce debates. And for questions about physics, when the data comes in and the theory starts to work, it gets accepted. The debate ends because you have more data. And so just going back to this, just trying to talk more about the Bible, personally, for me, I'll give the argument quickly, and then that's it. What will change hearts and minds is as we have more access to the data. So I tend to focus on the data here as much as I can, and I will try to entertain the other side. It's a responsible thing to say, hey, there are some serious problems with the young earth creation model. So people will ask, why are you a young earth creationist? I said, I'd rather defend my viewpoint than have to solve the problems of things like abiogenesis, eukaryotic evolution, solar system evolution, Big Bang. I'd rather try to fight the things that DapperDino mentioned, like the very tall coral mountains, and some of the stuff that Erica mentions, very good. And I've said this is teaching young earth creation responsibly, because I've matriculated through school. I see it, and you can survive it. You just say, okay, this is something I haven't resolved. So there are really 3 ways we can deal with this. We could say, I believe the earth is young. I don't believe the earth is young. Or 3, I'll decide later. And whatever your conscience leads you, I think that's great. I will say this, to the extent that I find that the model looks promising, that helps me believe in the Christian God. Because it's times like this when the economy is looking uncertain, and I've even talked to some atheists. I said, how long do you think humanity will last? Some of them say 500 years. Okay, so they'll cite like conservation, climate change, overpopulation, all sorts of wars, and just human nature. I'm just like, yeah, human nature, you look at history, it's pretty grim how humans behave toward one another. And now that we have all sorts of weapons of mass destruction, makes my heart sink. And if that's not enough, the solar system will burn out someday. And it just kind of makes me evaluate, why do I live? So that might be the reason, even if I don't have as many facts as I'd like, I'll move forward in a belief. That's no different than a lot of things we do in life, where we move forward with less facts than we'd like to be able to make sometimes major decisions. And in the case of Christianity, it guides our morals and our decisions and how we live our life. If the case about, let's say just intelligent design only didn't impact my faith, I wouldn't be eager to try to have a stand on it. So my stand is, I'll believe something. I will admit I don't have all the facts in hand. That's just where I am. So there's some style points that I have to agree with. So when Kent Hovind said Usher has never been proven wrong, this is going to lead down rabbit holes. No need to fight that. So I agreed with the panel on that. I didn't know what to do about the Yom Kippur. They did a drinking thing. I didn't quite comprehend what that was all about. I'd say, well, okay, that wasn't the most charitable criticism, but the point is that why do you make more targets for yourself if you're trying to make a persuasive argument? I misspeak a lot, but it doesn't excuse. It may explain the mistake, but it's still a mistake. Can't misuse the word imminent in the meaning. Fair game to go after that. And I have to admit, I didn't understand all the stuff that he would say that was misogynistic. I did not. I think I have very traditional views about the roles of men and women, and I probably could come across as misogynistic. I don't hate women. Example is I cared very much for Cindy Lincoln, and I cared for my dear mother who was dying for 7 years when she was disabled, cared for her for 18 years. But the point is that, I could complain about how people react to what Kent said. I actually don't understand what he said. There's something about the men in the afternoon or something. I really don't get what that was. Oh, that would be great to talk. Yes. And Paleologos, I'm sorry I haven't written you yet, sir. Right from the State of the Union. The State of the Union is kind of disconcerting. Just look at the rising prices. Okay, Kent on Columbine. Oh my goodness. That was a dodge. That was totally a dodge. He was saying, if they didn't drive, why did God let Columbine happen? It's because, he said something like, it's because we drove God out of the schools and they're trying to get God out of the schools. No, it's deeper than that. The question is, he dodged the more fundamental question, and I've tried to address this. Why did God create paradise? And this goes to Darwin's point that he said, and I'm trying to quote as closely as I remember it. He said, You know, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to quote it from memory because we have Google, and it's the quote about the devil's chaplain. What a book a devil's chaplain might write on the clumsy, wasteful, blundering, low, and horribly cruel work of nature. What a book a devil's chaplain might write on the clumsy, wasteful, blundering, low, and horribly cruel work of nature. And that's really the heart of the question, why would God allow Columbine to happen? Darwin's daughter died, I think probably before she was 10. And it's widely believed by Darwin biographers that had a tremendous impact on his outlook, his religious and philosophical views. So, you know, Kent just threw something out there and really didn't answer, you know, the question he himself posed. Why would God allow Columbine? So briefly, the answer, I've talked about this. I think there are two answers to this. 2 Corinthians 4:17. And by the way, I don't minimize evil in people's lives. My parents survived World War II, saw all sorts of horrible things. My aunt, you can Google the name Connie Reyes. And even though it's difficult for me to talk, I should memorialize her. She was raped and murdered. Okay, so there's been sadness in my life. Everyone who cares for anything will see things that can break their heart, and they'll have those questions. I think one of the hardest things I've had to do is someone approaches me. One time there was a young lady, and she said she'd been a victim of an assault, and you know what I mean. And I was like, well, how do I share the love of Jesus with someone like that? So I'm just saying, you know, those glib dismissals by Kent don't even resonate with Christians at some level, because actually Kent was addressing something much larger than just the Columbine thing. It's just the problem of evil in general. But 2 Corinthians 4:17 says, this momentary light affliction is building for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. And the idea is that both the suffering of Christ and also our own suffering is the price we pay for happiness in the future. And this came to mind because of C.S. Lewis. He lost his wife, and he was saying the price of the happiness I had with her, the price is the pain I'm feeling now. The Christian faith reverses that. The pain we have now, the suffering of Christ and the pain of his people now is the price for the happiness in the future. It reverses that. And that's the blessed hope. And that's why this whole question about origins is very close to my heart. The other thing is, why would God let the devil in to the Garden of Eden? But just backing up a little bit, I used to read the fairy tale of Snow White on my channel, and I asked the lady after I read it, I said, what would happen if you removed the evil queen? She said, it wouldn't be as beautiful a story. I said, you see, it's a little more subtle than just our present pain. If we look at it from a longer perspective, it can make sense. So when my aunt suffered and died, or anyone else who's a Christian, my answer would be, think of how good heaven would have to be to heal, to make up for that pain. And it would be better. The other thing is what happened in the Garden of Eden. God was testing. If you read Deuteronomy 13, he's testing us whether we love the Lord our God with all our heart and all our soul. So even though that was one thing about Columbine, he opened a can of worms and he didn't close it well. So I agreed 100% with the panel that he didn't handle that well, but maybe for reasons that they didn't think. I was impressed with the word, the beginning, the beginning doesn't necessarily mean the beginning of the universe. And I never thought about, like, when Jesus said the beginning, Adam from the beginning, which was day 6. So I thought Kent Hovind and Dapper did a great job on that. There was a side comment about a C.S. Lewis quote, liar, lunatic, or Lord. Liar, lunatic, or Lord. And someone said legend. It should actually be 4, because the legend is actually a big issue. And DapperDino helped, actually spoke to that matter on this channel. There was something about Hebrews 1:10, and now it slips my mind what that was. I agreed. Kent did misquote the age consensus of the Big Bang, but in his defense, he was quoting an old text. I myself didn't realize that was in the text, so I'd have to. I gave 100% agreement earlier. I'll give it half. He's just not up to date. Kent said 6,000 is a long time. Again, that is extraneous, and it's a short time, because relative to eternity, it's short. So I don't think that's a very good argument. But he has good delivery. I got to credit him for that. He did talk about eschatology and the 88 reasons Christ will return in 88. And he was saying, you know, don't max out your credit card. And someone said, yeah, pay your taxes. I thought that was funny. He said that atheists will ask you, who did Adam's sons marry? And I think it is a complication Christians will ask, and it deserves a good answer. So I'd say that was good. You have to make a good answer, though. And then he started going into stuff, all the details and speculations about who Seth married. And it's like, okay, depending on the context of what he was trying to do, maybe that wasn't worth it. I didn't get a lot of science from him. The Dukes of he's talking about the passage about the Dukes of Edom, and then he made a joke about the Dukes of Hazzard. Lame joke. So I sided with the panel there. He talked about toothpaste and husbands and wives disagreeing on how to squeeze toothpaste. I could go into vulgar territory, but I'm not going to go there. I thought if you wanted to highlight differences between just people or men and women, he might be able to. I found oh yeah, I feel that Sal sides me with me more than I would expect. It is true, and I have to say why. I was persecuted. I was humiliated. I was bullied in church. I did not like Ken Ham also bullying me remotely, saying all these vile things about my character because I was struggling with the question of young earth. So yes, because when I had gone to these creation talks and I just hear more Bible preached at me rather than answering scientific questions, I get very discouraged. So how much science did Kent actually discuss? Now, he might have some other things, other videos where he discusses the science, but I've heard some of those and they're horrible. So, I don't know, what are the differences? I will say some things we know physiologically. I don't know why I went out of focus. Women and men actually sense the world slightly differently. Like women are very sensitive to color. They can distinguish colors. I don't know how the perceptual psychologists were able to determine that, but they're more sensitive to color. And there are other things that the way that they process data from the environment is, it can be measurably different than men. And so I'm trying to think of, there there's only one minor incident, I think, where there's about 20 years ago, there's this girl I liked, and we would, she loved clothing. And so I humored her, and we go to the clothing store, and she tried to dress me up the way she wanted. And I humored that. I thought she didn't like my leather jacket. She did not like my leather bomber jacket. So she dressed me up in what she liked. And she had this shirt. I said, I'm not going to wear that orange shirt. And she said, no, it's coral. Okay, so I'll move on. I talked already about the Coke incident. I agree 100%. And he cited the 20 billion years old figure. And he is conflating evolution. But there is a problem. I mean, it could go either way, because we do. Now, when I argue it, just as a pointer to creationist, I do try to separate abiogenesis from evolution, because Darwin himself did in The Origin of Species, when he said the progenitor of all creatures was created. I mean, we could argue what he meant by saying that, but he was distinguishing between the progenitor's origin and the subsequent diversification thereafter. It's in the last chapter of Origin of Species. He says that. And however, when I do talk about evolutionists as far as the solar system, I mean, that is a term that they sometimes use, but so my advice is just be careful with your terminology. I mean, don't give your opponents, sometimes when they criticize you, take it to heart and deal with it as best you can, because they may be helping you help you with your choice of words and the way you phrase things, just so you don't get into these fights over definitions. And that's about all I had to say. So let me look through the comments here, the comment section. And I'm really sorry Cindy wasn't able to join. Let me see if she had anything to say. I think I'm gonna Cindy texts me a lot, but I want to, I don't think she said anything that's private, but just to be on the safe side, I'm not going to relate what she said, but she did put a lot of things on my cell phone telling me what she thought. I will commend her that she really didn't want to go to that. She didn't want to seem approving of a drinking game. And, and I respect the idea of appearances. But I got to say, I wanted to be there with my friends. And I respect Bent, no relation, Kent Hovind, no relation. He said he's just drinking tea. And I said, I respect that. So let me just scroll through the comments, and then we're going to go on to Antony Flew. So that'll be it for the after show. And I'd be happy to, let me see. So let me get this going here. I have my other computer here, so if you see me looking off to the side, that's what I'm looking at. Okay. Now, the way this, see, I have a scroll bar here. I learned something. All right, so I'm going to try to go. Okay, so someone said there was an echo for some reason. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I should not be taking a hit. I'll tell you what was distasteful. SFT, I was on Logical Probables channel, and I was just asking about what's the after show about? SFT comes and starts taunting me. He said, "Oh, I'm so sorry no one came out to hear you and Cindy bash Kent Hovind." The guy just likes to tear into me and pick fights. And, that's, I wanted to tell him, I said, you're advertising, Kent, you're party to this now. All that's going on. You might be encouraging people to send their kids to go with them to Dinosaur Adventureland, and you're teaching them bad science. And, you should be standing behind victims. And I saw SFT, well, I'm not going to go there. I've also had some things with Raw Matt that I just don't want to deal with him. So I'm going to continue here. Let me see if I just scroll down. So Danish debater, thank you for coming out. Tomorrow we have our show on radiometric dating, and I'm going to be covering the graduate paper I worked on affecting nuclear structure with chemical, electrical, and even biological means. And sadly, there's a scientist who's working on that in the Ukraine. And my paper began to touch on low energy nuclear reactions, which is very important to the young Earth case. That being said, an ex-young Earth creationist by the name of Jordan Kareem will be on the channel tomorrow, and we're going to slug through this. It'll be part 1. At some point, John B., who is a paleogeochemist and also does radiometric dating all around the world, he may join one of the shows. So we're just going to have a scholarly discussion. For those who've been to my channel before, it is probably one of the most boring, nerdy channels you'll ever be a part of. Put you to sleep. Sometimes when I watch my own shows, it puts me to sleep, because we will review scientific evidence like scientists. Okay, so Fran Marie, great to see you. I think Fran Marie might even be going to my church here at McLean until I got threatened with arrest in jail. So I'm in exile right now. That's another story. I got kicked out of casinos. I get kicked out of church too. I just can't seem to get out of trouble, Late Luma. Dinosaur Adventureland has an amazing model of a con artisaurus in DapperDino's. I'm going to tear up. And thank you all for the kind words. And I'm just gonna, I'm sorry about the echo. I kind of knew there was a challenge there. Yes, we will mock. I'll do it too. So I can't fault you for something I do myself. I've mocked Hovind, and it doesn't endear me to some people. People who know me know I don't hide my feelings. I'd never be a good poker player. I was a blackjack player. Didn't care, didn't matter if my feelings came through, if I was excited about the hand I had, but that wouldn't work in poker. So people know right away where I stand. If I like something, I don't. I'm probably the most transparent person you'll ever meet, and that's to a fault. I never make a good liar. Kent deserves to be insulted into the ground. Now, this is an interesting thing. There is a tendency when someone's on your tribe to defend him even when he does wrong. We see it in sports dynamics where, your buddy did something wrong, but because he's on your team, you don't, you give him a little bit of a break. And I get that. So there is some unspoken rule that, there's a point when enough is enough. So All right, all right. Well, when we talked about being like-minded, Dapper Dino, yeah, yeah. Um, and someone said, "Hi, Mom." Well, that's nice. Well, Mrs. Cheshire Vic, welcome. I'm honored that you'd visit my show. And Kent Hovind's here. And here's another name, Roxanne. That's a beautiful name, Roxanne. That's Alexander the Great's love. All right, so I think I've gotten through all this. And then, so now we're going to go into boring philosophical stuff. So all the stuff about Dapper Dino's show is pretty much done. And yes, this would be fine. We can chat. Dapper has my contact information, or I'll ask him for yours. And Paleo Logos, yes, we'll talk about human evolution. I'm going to mention this in passing. I did a show Saturday night. I said, do not debate Erica. Do not get in. I said, avoid dogfights with Erica. First off, Erica and I have agreed not to debate each other because we're friends. And in a debate, we can talk. We can disagree, be on the same show and say, I believe this, and and this is why I think I'm right, and she could do the same. In a debate, it's more confrontational, and you're trying to persuade the audience by also kind of humiliating your opponent. It's kind of a dominance battle there, and that's not very conducive to friendships. I have a wise man said he usually doesn't compete with his friends because they don't stay friends long. I mean, there's a certain, I mean, it goes both ways. If you were not friends before, but you're opponents, let's say in a sporting arena or even the battlefield, we've had fighter pilots that would be shooting each other during the war, and after the war, they meet each other. They're like brothers at that point. It happens. But a friendship that is already started, once you add that kind of introduce the combat there, it's like, yeah, it can change the dynamics. And I'd like to remain friends with Erica for one. But I've advised creationists, I said, you're not gonna win the battle over human evolution if you debate with Erica on her terms. I said the way that common descent can be proven, or at least persuaded for the listener, is to argue that the Earth and the fossil record are young. All this stuff because you see evolution, you see progressions in form. You can take, I see it in gene browsing, and I said, guys, unless you've done gene browsing and you've actually dealt with the data, just don't argue in that space. You can say, yes, they're kind of, they're kind of subtle gaps or whatever. I call it, like, well, you're climbing a stairway, they're little punctuated moves up. I said, that's not sufficient. You can clearly see that there's a progression from simple to more complex, and from creatures that are very similar, like chimpanzees to humans, all the way to creatures that are very dissimilar, like, say, bacteria. And you can throw all these sets of creatures and you can build a stairway. So I've been disappointed with my fellow creationists that they keep focusing on the stuff Erica talks about. I said, you're going to get slaughtered. That's not the way to deal with it. And that's not any disrespect intended toward Erica. In fact, it's my respect for her that I would not tell creationists to debate her on those terms. And Rebecca Davis, an occasional co-host here, she found out the hard way what it could be like. Now, in Rebecca's defense, it wasn't a debate and she didn't know what she was getting into. And I said, okay, well, we all learn, and we can, sometimes we get humiliated because it looks like we don't know anything and we're believing blindly. And that's something that can be dealt with. but Erica is, I call her the Yet Terminator. She's like Arnold Schwarzenegger. She's very good at what she does, and I respect her tremendously. And, what can be done is to consider the arguments she puts forward and to ponder it. And so Paleologos just brought that to mind because he specializes in human evolution. The other thing is, if Erica and I ever actually, not that we would debate, but if we actually had kind of a little bit more confrontational discussion, I'd be talking at the base of the phylogenetic tree, which is eukaryotic evolution. She'd be talking kind of toward the end branches, which is human evolution. So, and then there's Mr. Sirius. Mr. Sirius, greetings. All right, and trust in Christ before it's too late. Yes, amen. Oh, there was on Dapper's channel, there's an interesting point about BC versus BCE. And I never thought about that BCE could be offensive to people that are not of a Christian background. And maybe in the earlier history of the United States, before our culture started to be, and our economies were so integrated with the rest of the world, I could understand how, the Western world would just say BC. But now we're starting to have some sensitivity to dealing with people that are not of the Christian faith. And I think, I try to respect, and that's something that we have to learn to do. We can respect things that are important to people we disagree with. And that's a good thing to do. So I can understand. I will use BC if my intended audience is definitely Christian. I will use BC. But I do write for secular audiences, including secular science peer-reviewed journals. I'm fine with using BCE in that sense. And Janet, dear sister, being desperate for more of Jesus is a blessed place to be. He is near to the brokenhearted. And Janet, I wish to honor you. I think of my elderly and disabled mother, and for those, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, Janet. Janet lost her husband, and she's had to rely on the Lord to take care of her because she's disabled, and so she's trusted herself into God's hands. And Janet, you've been a great encouragement to me. Thank you, dear sister, and thank you for being such a faithful visitor to this channel. Trust in Christ. Greetings, Benjamin, and Young Earth Creationist. Yes, and hopefully we'll be able to talk. Mr. Rich Bob. And I think that's everyone. I just wanted to acknowledge as many people as I could. And now I will talk about the other topic I had in mind. So certainly, Joel Duff is here. Dr. Duff, thank you for visiting. So I will talk about, move on to the next topic, and I'll talk about Armageddon after that. There is this book. I don't delve into philosophy that much, but there is a famous philosopher by the name of Antony, and he'd been a famous atheist, and he has this picture of his self upside down, and his book is There Is a God, How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind. So I'll read some selected portions of this, and actually the introduction was pretty good. He got a lot of accolades for this. Famous atheist now believes in God. One of the world's leading atheists now believes in God, more or less, based on scientific evidence. This is the headline of a December 9th, 2004 Associated Press story that went on to say, quote, a British philosophy professor who has been a leading champion of atheism for more than a half century has changed his mind. He now believes in God more or less based on scientific evidence and says so on a video released Thursday. Almost immediately, the announcement became a media event, touching off reports and commentaries around the globe on radio and TV, in newspapers, and on internet sites. The story gained such momentum that AP put out 2 subsequent releases relating to the original announcement. The subject of the story and much subsequent speculation was Professor Antony Flew, author of over 30 professional philosophical works that helped set the agenda for atheism for half a century. In fact, his Theology and Falsification, a paper first presented at a 1950 meeting of the Oxford University Socratic Club chaired by C.S. Lewis, became the most widely reprinted philosophical publication of the last century. Now, for the first time, he gives an account of the arguments and evidence that led him to change his mind. The book, in a sense, represents the rest of the story. Just briefly, it was the intelligent design arguments that were two of the three major components. One was the fine-tuning of the universe and the origin of the universe. He felt that that was good evidence for God. And then the origin of life. He felt the improbabilities were such that this indicated a miraculous origin, or that I could be mischaracterizing this a little bit, but he did say that weighed heavily on him. It seemed that the human species was the purpose of a lot of creation, and those were the two scientific things. The thing about cosmological fine-tuning is well accepted among professional circles, professional cosmologists and physicists. And what fine-tuning is that there are various ways to state it, but there are a lot of ways the universe could have been constructed where you wouldn't even form the periodic table of elements. It'd be a very empty universe. You wouldn't have stars and planets and atoms, etc. And so the other thing about it is it looks like it's very optimized for scientific discovery, what we call the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. In formal terms, we'd call that the algorithmic compressibility of the laws of physics. So, so the correlation of scientific discoverability and habitability of the universe is the fine-tuning. That was a strong evidence for a lot of theistic evolutionists who believe in a naturalistic origin of life. The fine-tuning argument weighs heavily for them, as it does for Francis Collins. He suggested that he's a theistic evolutionist. He puts forward the fine-tuning and the Big Bang as evidence of a creator. I'll continue here with the preface. I played a small part in the AP story because I had helped organize the symposium and resulting video in which Tony Flew announced what he later humorously referred to as his conversion. In fact, from 1985, I helped organize several conferences at which he had made the case for atheism. So this work is personally the culmination of a journey begun 2 decades ago. Curiously, the response to the AP story from Flew's fellow atheists verged on hysteria. One atheist website tasked a correspondent with giving monthly updates on Flew's falling away from the true faith. Inane insults and juvenile caricatures were common in the free-thinking blog sphere. The same people who complained about the Inquisition and witches being burned at the stake were now enjoying a little heresy hunting of their own. The advocates of tolerance were not themselves very tolerant, and apparently religious zealots don't have a monopoly on dogmatism, incivility, fanaticism, and paranoia. I think he's describing the anti-theists there. But raging mobs cannot rewrite history, and Flu's position in the history of atheism transcends anything that today's atheists have on offer. Flu's significance in the history of atheism. It is not too much to say that within the last 100 years, no mainstream philosopher has developed the kind of systematic, comprehensive, original, and influential exposition of atheism that is to be found in Antony Flu's 50 years of anti-theological writings. Prior to Flu, the major apologias for atheism were those of Enlightenment thinkers like David Hume and 19th century German philosophers Arthur Schopenhauer, Ludwig Feuerbach, and Friedrich Nietzsche. But what about Bertrand Russell, who maintained rather implausibly that he was technically an agnostic, although he was an atheist in practice? And I'm seeing we're up at about an hour. Oh my goodness, someone asked. Oh boy. Okay, this is interesting. Who maintained, Bertrand Russell, who maintained rather implausibly that he was technically an agnostic, although he was an atheist in practice. Now there also is there's a kind of the corresponding flip side of the coin there. There are people who may label themselves like atheists at some time in their lives, but live as though they are Christians. From what I hear from Jordan Peterson's own words, that would describe him quite well for most of his life. He didn't like going to church, but he said he could either choose to be nihilistic or live his life like a Christian, like there was a God, that there was a purpose, that there was meaning in life. And I found that very compelling, and that relates to how I have lived the Christian life. There are times I said, I could just give up on everything and say, God, you got to prove things to me. Or I could try to accept and live this way. This is where we make decisions where we don't have as much information as we'd like. But I knew that, once you start to live your life a certain way, sometimes there are things you do that you don't have a backspace key for. So I made that decision. And so I could relate to Jordan Peterson saying that, he may have had his moments of pure atheism, but he decided it'd be better for him to live like a Christian. And so when Bertrand Russell here is talking about, he was technically an agnostic, but he lived like an atheist, I also get that. And so I will read more from Antony Flew, maybe in another installment. And I'll talk about briefly what's on tomorrow's show on Radiometric Dating Stream. What had happened when I was in graduate school, I was in a solid state physics class, and I was at the bottom of the class. I didn't like that. A lot of the graduate students are kind of equal. I mean, we're all just, it's kind of scary. They're all really dedicated, and a lot of them are bright. A lot of the people in my class were from MIT, Harvard, Stanford. I mean, you get the picture. These are the people that will spend a lot of time also doing homework and study. They're very studious. So sometimes I'd be at the top of the class, and sometimes I'd be at the bottom of the class. This time I was at the bottom of the class in solid state physics. And we were, the professor said, okay, whatever topic you want, just, kind of be in the realm of solid state physics, which is condensed matter physics. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go for broke here. I came to graduate school because I was interested in the young earth creation topic. And I said, what better thing than to look about whether nuclear structure can be changed, one, if it will affect radioactive decay, or at least the profile of the daughter and parent products. And I said, why don't I just look? I said, okay, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to cite any young earth creationist stuff that's not peer reviewed. And I had to dig. I really had to dig. And I went to the Homewood campus of Johns Hopkins, their library there. I spent 2 days there digging up whatever I could, talking to the librarians, and I'd be digging up these obscure papers, stuff I couldn't easily get on Google. And they were helping me with the searches. I was just reading and reading. So the first thing that caught my attention was that lightning generates neutrons. And so that's interesting, because one particular young Earth theory postulates radiation originated through electricity. And so I was just like, okay, this is starting to get my attention. I also learned a lot about the various kinds of nuclear reactions. So we have very low temperature. Cold fusion actually happened. It's called muon catalyzed fusion. It can happen at very cold temperatures. But you're able to overcome the Coulomb forces because these muons go in there. And it's very hard to make a muon particle and insert it in there, but it can happen at low temperatures. When they talk about the cold fusion is not happening, they're talking about cold fusion that happens without the muons. But at least I learned something. I also learned that they have devices that can make neutrons, and they're electrically powered. Chemistry labs sometimes have them if they're trying to make certain isotopes. So that caught my attention. Then I started to look at these exploding wire experiments, where we were getting nuclear transmutation. When electricity would go through a wire, it would create a Z-pinch. That's at least the accepted mechanism. And it may induce fusion. The question is whether these are actually fusion reactions or something else. That's an interesting topic, and I'm a little bit agnostic as to what the mechanisms are. So I began to be excited, and there was stuff with palladium, and then there was also pyroelectric fusion that can also happen at very low temperatures of the solid state object, but actually at the point of the spear, so to speak, where the fusion's happening, the temperatures are very high. So I was just dumping this out just to see. I said, okay, this is a great chance to have a professional scientist review my data. I didn't confess to him the reason I was doing this. So the day of the presentation, all of us would present to all the other students. I made my presentation, and at the end of class, he said that was the topic of the night. He was pointing to me. So thank you, Dr. Charles. That was very kind of you. That meant a lot to me. And he said, this is a very interesting topic. And so what is on the hook for tomorrow? It will probably be a series where Jordan Kareem and John B will be on my channel. We'll just be talking about the basics. It may bore you all to death. But it is important that I talk to the other side, that they highlight the pros and cons. Now, I wouldn't be a young Earth creationist now if I didn't think that there were real problems with some issues with radiation. It is the second biggest problem in young Earth creationism is radiometric dating, the first being distant starlight. That being said, there are problems. I'd taken an astrophysics class and also a cosmology class. We still have problems with the nucleosynthesis model. How do we get the heavy elements in particular? There are all these theories, but how did they get here on Earth? One of the papers we'll talk about, not papers, uranium is on the continental crust. There's 70 times more uranium on the continental crust than there is on the seafloor, and presumably the mantle underneath us. How did we get that distribution? This would lend credence to the origin of heavy elements through a process other than the galactic or these stars and collisions and supernova. I'm not getting it right. That's why we're having the talk tomorrow. How did you get uranium? Because in these exploding wire and other experiments, we're able to get all sorts of elements. And one particular experiment was able to make the isotopes of uranium into proportions we see them. And so this is really this started to get my attention. The other thing is because I'm very interested in renewable energy rather than burning off fossil fuels, even though I'm kind of ambivalent to the climate change thing. I'm very strong in feeling we have to conserve our environment. We can't be burning off these quote unquote fossil fuels and overgrowing our population and expecting that life will be feasible here. So I'll be covering that. So people have asked, what are your arguments for young Earth creationism? I will be starting to lay more of the technical stuff out. For the last 2 years, I focused on biology, partly because that was my paid job, but now I have freedom to explore the areas where I really want to touch base. So there are interesting discussions on the effect of temperature and pressure on nuclear decay. There is some, even in Wikipedia, you'll see that. There is some, depending on what decay chain you're dealing with, it can be influenced by temperature and pressure. There was also this discussion at the, I think it was 2012, American Chemical Society meeting. That's the big organization for chemistry. They explored low energy nuclear reactions because there were enough chemists exploring this. And there was one thing there that caught my eye that I said, nah, this is too crazy. It is the work of accelerating nuclear decay using biological organisms at Chernobyl by Vladimir Vostovsky. Now, I'd be sorry that I keep getting out of focus here. I don't know why. Sadly, he teaches at a university in Kiev, the one that's under siege now. But he has a very high and respected position there. And also, I hear that he's a hero at Chernobyl because he was able to remediate some of the radioactive waste with bacteria. And because this flies so much out of the mainstream, it's only in that area where it can be studied. You know, when people are desperate, they'll look for this. I've looked at his research. The first thing is, it can be, in principle, we could try to replicate it somewhere. So that's a plus. And he's held in high regard by other scientists. I mean, the other scientists were welcoming him to come to the American Chemical Society. There are things that I began to see, and I showed the thumbnail earlier, where there was stuff with the group 10 elements, particularly palladium. Let me see if I could find it now. It was Imamura's work. Let me see if I could find it. Yep, I'll show the picture. It is the same as the thumbnail here. And I was looking at this, and this is why I want to have discussions with people like Jordan Kareem and John B, because John B is a PhD geochemist who works with radiometric dating. And we're just going to have these discussions, and if someone else wants to weigh in, I want to see them. And we can have it back and forth. I'm not going to, what I've said is, the way that these discussions go, we could either do more arguments or we could gather more data. And I would argue that, there's no point in trying to just make more arguments. What we can do is like say, okay, let's explore the data that we have in hand. Let's try to evaluate the cranks and the frauds from what we might think has a chance of being legitimate. And that's about all we could do. So this graph was from Imamura's paper. He's being funded by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. He works with other respected university professors in Japan. He took palladium. He took palladium and put deuterium in it and some other elements, and he was able to transmute this Ba into Sm. I don't know how to pronounce those elements. And he was able to also do it with isotopes, and there were other things. We are now seeing a lot of nuclear transmutations, and we don't quite know how to account for it. And the reason that this persists is chemists have been able to do more and more of this. We get trace amounts. So when they say that there's no evidence of fusion, I'm willing to accept that. It could be another mechanism of nuclear change. It doesn't have to be fusion to change what's inside the nucleus. And so is the mechanism a new law of physics, or maybe a different interpretation of the existing laws? I would go with a different interpretation of the existing laws. I think just, I get along so well with DapperDino's channel, but every now and then I have to put my foot down and say, I think we actually, the young Earth creationists have a real shot at seeing this happen. Maybe, I don't know if it's going to happen in my lifetime, but this looks really promising, and it's in the field that I find extremely fascinating. Most of my education was actually not in biology, it was in physics. So Dr. Sanford will tell you, he could tell I was itching to go back into physics. So this whole thing with renewable energy and opportunities for new frontiers in physics and research, to me, is exciting just in and of itself, but its relevance to the young Earth creation discussion is also another plus. So let's see what else. So that's what is going to be talked about tomorrow. We're going to talk about the evidence and what we consider the quality of the evidence and what would be persuasive. So this is, okay, here you go. I'm happy for the X have a shot, but so far they're like 0 for, okay, yep. This is where Dapper and I sharply disagree. And Dapper, I love you. So, hey, we're cool. And yes, I was an engineer. Harry Stark said I was an engineer. Yes, I was. So when you saw me on top of that airplane in the opening, my employer sent me off to flight school because they wanted their engineers to understand their job better. So I got to fly in an aerobatic Marchetti fighter trainer. That was so much fun, and I miss that. I don't know that it's hard to say this, but something I love. I think those days are behind me. I have a little bit of an occasional inner ear problem. I don't think I could take the G's I did back then. I could get sick now when I start doing those spins and maneuvers. So that's what's for tomorrow. So finally, I'm going to close the show, and I want to thank everyone for coming. I really hope I'm wrong, and that maybe I'm just being, just overly pessimistic. But I am concerned about the condition of the world. There are a lot of crazy people out there with nuclear weapons, and a lot of people that are just terrible human beings in positions of power. And what we see going on throughout human history, that tends to be kind of the sad way things go, where you get some of the worst human beings controlling the resources and enslaving people and doing horrible things and starting wars. And it's for that reason. And brother, especially Kent Hovind, who's a theistic evolutionist, I embrace him as my Christian brother. I don't mean to offend people of different faiths, but I just have to say, speaking for myself, I've been praying a lot. I would love to see, the desire for happily ever after is something so deep in my heart for myself and the people I love. And when that's threatened, it's really easy to be discouraged. Now, if there's not enough discouragement, let me find this Bible passage, because I think I want to share it here. Let's see. I'm sorry, this is a little bit off the cuff. That's why I didn't come prepared. So it's from Luke chapter 21. And I'm going to share it because it relates to what's on my heart. And so one of the reasons that this is on my heart, one reason that I subscribe to the Christian faith, is that there are many times I think it describes the condition of the world accurately. and it's not always a pretty picture. So let me share this here, and then we'll close the stream up shortly. Jesus said in Luke chapter 21, "Then he said to them, nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and pestilences, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. Before all this, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors for my name's sake. This will be your opportunity to bear witness. Settle it therefore in your minds not to meditate beforehand how to answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom which none of your adversaries will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be delivered up even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends. And some of you they will put to death. You will be hated by all for my name's sake, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your lives." And I'll just skip. Now when these things begin to take place, straighten up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. I'll just skip some more. But stay awake. Okay. But watch yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness, and the cares of this life, and that day come upon you like a trap. For it will come upon all who dwell on the face of the whole earth. But stay awake at all times, praying that you may have strength to escape all these things that are going to take place and stand before the Son of Man. And just to reflect on this is so heavy, I'd rather not believe it. I would like to believe that we will not be having to endure that, especially this generation. I do not want to see it for myself or the people I love or the society I dreamed of. And, I think we can, just like in the Old Testament, some of the righteous kings would pray and God would delay Judgment Day. And I think to some extent that's what I'm praying. May the Lord grant us a little bit of relief. May we have some more good times together to hang out like what we did tonight, and enjoy some good times before the end comes, because when it comes, it'll be better. And I know it may sound selfish. I hope I'm not around when it happens. So those are my thoughts. I see even more of my friends who've joined tonight, and I'm really grateful that you have been a part of this channel and this discussion. So with that, stay safe. Have a blessed evening. The Lord be with you. Have a good night. God bless.